My name is Koki Riley, and I'm an AP poll voter. Today I'm here to explain my AP poll vote after week 4. I have Penn State at 1, Miami at 2, Georgia 3, Ohio State 4, Oregon 5, Texas A&M 6, Oklahoma 7, LSU 8, Texas 9. Oklahoma and Miami were the only teams that played games of real consequence this week. Miami beat Florida 26-7 at home. Oklahoma beat Auburn 24-17 at home. The only team that I really had a lot of sort of consternation about was Oklahoma, because that was a game where you could have made a really strong case that Auburn should have at least sent the game into overtime. There were some controversial calls that didn't really go Auburn's way, and given the nature of that game being on the road, you could make the case to move Oklahoma down a little bit. But still, when you compare Oklahoma's resume to a team like LSU or Texas, I still think they have the better resume. I still think they have the more well-rounded team at the moment, especially with John Mateer at quarterback. So that's why I kind of just kept Oklahoma where they're at. And that's a good thing to remember when we talk about Auburn momentarily, actually, because I think last week I had them around the teens, and this week I might have actually even bumped them up despite losing. And a lot of it had to do with the circumstances of that game and the fact that they also had a win against Baylor that I think has looked pretty solid so far. Things start to change at number 10. I had Indiana as my new number 10 team. Last week, that number 10 was Notre Dame, very controversially so. I moved Notre Dame down a little bit, in part because of their defense and the fact they gave 30 points to a Purdue team that we didn't think was going to be very good heading into the year, and I still don't think it's going to be that great. So that's why Indiana shoots all the way up from unranked to 10, and that seems like an overreaction, but Indiana had been in and around my top 25 through the last 3 weeks. Even if they weren't in it, they were either team 26 or team 27. So effectively, they came into the season as a pretty solid team. We were just waiting for them to play a real team. And this week they played Illinois, which was in my number 11, which was number 9 in the AP poll heading into this past week. And they won the game 63-10, which is about as good of a win as you could possibly have. I mean, they were at home, but still, when you beat a team 63-10, and a team that we think is going to be pretty good in Illinois, 63-10, you deserve a major bump up. And I think I kind of underestimated how good their quarterback is, Fernando Mendoza, in that heading into the year, he was one of the most underrated players in the country. And I think to put up that sort of performance against Illinois kind of shows that he's a real Heisman contender now. My number 11 is Texas Tech. This is also pretty notable because this was, again, another team that we were kind of waiting for them to play a real game. And I think they had one of the easiest schedules in the country heading into this week, them and the team that they faced in Utah, and that's why it was such a big game. And Texas Tech pulled away late. They played 2 quarterbacks, and yet they still won that game on the road, one of the toughest environments in college football. I give them a lot of credit, and I had them at, I believe, 17 last week. I pushed them up 6 spots to 11. Could have maybe even gone higher if it weren't for the Indiana result, honestly. And I thought they dominated both lines of scrimmage. They played better as the game went along. And I really think Will Hammond, the backup who came in, should be the starter moving forward, because I thought he looked much, much better than Baron Morton in that game. Tennessee's at 12. They get the bump up despite not playing great competition this week, in part because I think I overreacted to the loss a little bit too much, even though I still had them fairly high. Again, they were a field goal away from beating my number 3 team in Georgia. Granted, they were at home, but still, that would have been a massive, massive result. And I got to give them credit for playing a very competitive game against a great team. And that, combined with another blowout win, and the fact that Syracuse, who they beat in week 1, beat Clemson this past week, all those sort of factors is why they sort of bumped up the list. And I kind of like their resume better than my number 13 team in Notre Dame. Even though Notre Dame's 1-2. They're still in the top 15 despite being that, which is very strange. But again, they lost to my number 2 team by 3 points. They lost to my number 16 by 1 point. So I still give them a lot of credit for that. But I will say this, even though they won this week, I actually feel a little bit worse about them despite losing their first 2 weeks, if that makes sense, because of the competition they faced and the fact that they were at home in this game against Purdue, giving up 30 points. A little bit concerning. Number 14 team was Auburn. We talked about them a little bit earlier when it came to Oklahoma. I think I actually moved them up because of this performance a little bit. And I think this week really showed that they are a legitimate top 15, top 20 team. And combine that with a pretty dominant road win against a Baylor team that is pretty flawed, but has a decent win itself over SMU and almost beat Arizona State this week. I still think Auburn's a very good team. Even if I have major questions at quarterback, I still think that they can run the ball. I still think their receivers are really, really good. I still think their defense is excellent. They really held down Oklahoma's offense better than anyone else has this season. That includes Michigan, who Oklahoma beat earlier in the year. And that's kind of a good segue because Michigan's number 15 team. There's really no case for Michigan to be ahead of Auburn because they both played Oklahoma. They both played them at Oklahoma. And Oklahoma looked much more dominant against Michigan than they did against Auburn. And Auburn's offense looked much better against Oklahoma at Oklahoma than Michigan's offense looked at Oklahoma. So Michigan's still at 15 though, because they had this nice win against Nebraska this week, which is, I think, kind of a borderline top 25 team. And to win that game on the road and win it fairly convincingly, even though it was only a 3-point score, I think that warrants them to be in the top 15. Number 16 is Florida State, and I know a lot of people have been waiting for me to get to them. I know the Florida State fan base isn't particularly happy with me at the moment about them, but at the same time, they're really, really tough because they have one of the best wins in the country with that win against Alabama in week 1. And I don't think much more else needs to be said about that. It was a fairly dominant win. They were at home. They did a really good job of winning that game, but they've only played 3 games. A lot of other teams have played 4. Those other 2 wins were against arguably the worst team in the FBS, and Kent State, and an FCS team. And you sort of combine all that with the fact that heading into the season, I didn't even have them close to the top 25. I thought they'd be like a mid-tier ACC team. So to say that they're a top 10 team or close to the top 10, you basically have to believe that this Alabama game, either you thought they were much better than I thought they were going to be heading into the season, or you thought this Alabama game is the reason why they should be a top 10 team. And I'm honestly just not quite there yet with them. And when in doubt, I'm going to pick the teams that have faced better competition and have proven that they can play with that better competition more than once. Florida State's done it once, quite obviously, in that Alabama game, but they've only done it once. And honestly, like this Virginia game this upcoming week, it's a Friday game, but I think that's actually going to teach us quite a decent bit about this team, because they go in there and they beat Virginia on the road and they dominate them. And Virginia is not a terrible team. I think that would actually speak quite a bit to me. And that would actually get me to sort of open up a little bit more about, all right, let's push this team into the top 15, top 20, top 10, maybe, depending on the other scores around the country. I mean, nothing's guaranteed, right? I mean, there's weird stuff that happens, like Notre Dame being 1 and 2 and being in the top 15. But that's kind of where I'm at right now with them. And I'm kind of in a holding pattern, if I'm being honest. And it took me a long time to sort of figure out where to place them, because their resume is really sparse. And maybe I underrated them heading into the season, and I just need to abandon that take. But I just need more evidence to prove that I should do that. And then after that is Alabama. We talked about them a little bit here in our Florida State conversation. They're kind of in a similar spot where I had them as my number 5 team heading in. I dropped them a decent bit after that Florida State loss, really rough loss. It was on the road and it was week 1, so I guess you can kind of, I don't say excuse that, but kind of note that. But still, they need to play better. And yes, they have the Wisconsin win, but Wisconsin looks like one of the worst teams among the power groups, among the Power 4. So that's just kind of where I am with Alabama right now. We're going to learn a lot more about them next week when they play Georgia. This week when they play Georgia. Same goes with Penn State and Oregon. Neither of those teams really played great competition, but they're way higher because I think a lot of people, myself included, thought they were going to be great teams heading into the year. So that's kind of why. But after that, try to move along a little bit faster here. 19-9 Missouri, good win this week against South Carolina. Not great. I kind of wish they were a little bit more dominant in this game, but Lenore Sellers played for the entire game. Number 20 is Vanderbilt. That's kind of the two, like kind of the direct comparison you can make with both these teams. They both played South Carolina. Vanderbilt won the game much more convincingly on the road, but the major exception is the fact that South Carolina's quarterback, Lenore Sellers, was hurt for most of the game. In Vanderbilt's win, which is why they kind of pulled away, which gives a decent explanation as for why they pulled away in that game as much as they did. So honestly, I kind of went with the fact that I kind of like Missouri a little bit more heading into the season, and I think their Kansas win is better than any other win that Vanderbilt has, especially given that Virginia Tech, which is the best win Vandy has, other than the South Carolina game, has really, really fallen off. So after that, 21's TCU. They had a big win against SMU this week to maintain their spot in the top 25, and that was kind of the statement win that I needed to see them have, because I don't think beating North Carolina on the road is much of a statement win, just given that they looked really, really bad again this week. 22 is Georgia Tech. They got penalized a little bit given the way Clemson has fallen even further. Clemson loses to Syracuse this week pretty convincingly, and that kind of took a little wind out of the sails for me when it came to Georgia Tech, but still think this is a pretty good team heading into the year. So I'm a little bit of a wait and see pattern with them, because they're kind of similar to LSU, where heading into the year, if you had told me they would have a win against Clemson, I'd be like, holy moly. But given the way that Clemson has fallen off, now it's harder to tell. 23 is Arizona State. They had a big win on the road against Baylor, as I mentioned earlier. Kind of kept them in my top 25 despite the Mississippi State loss, because I felt very, very good about that team heading into the season. So they've done just enough to sort of stay in the top 25. That's basically what I'm saying. 24 is USC. They don't really have a notable win, but they kind of just keep on winning, and they keep on winning in fairly dominant fashion. And also, like, you have 25 teams in the poll at some point. So that's why they're at 24, and Iowa State's at 25, and they've kind of slowly fallen as their notable wins, I guess, have not looked quite as good. 3-point win against Iowa. Don't love Iowa. 3-point win against Kansas State. Kansas State's 1-3. So they barely beat Arkansas State. Meanwhile, Arkansas destroys Arkansas State. So I don't love the Iowa State resume, but they're still in there in part because of how I felt about them in the preseason. The fact that they keep on winning these games for a reason. And just for if anyone's wondering, 26 was Illinois, 27 was Nebraska, 28 was Washington, 29 was Kansas. But that can change a lot given what happens this upcoming week. So for that, my very long essay, that's my poll for this week. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below on this good old video on YouTube, and like, subscribe, follow along all our work here at the Advocate NOLA.com. You can follow me at Koki Riley on Twitter, and thanks for watching.